Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a complete, self-contained masterclass on the foundational theories of legal research, and we're going to transform all of that into a totally practical, step-by-step toolkit. Whether you've been around the legal block a few times, or you're stepping into this level of academic writing for the very first time, I am going to walk you through exactly how to build a dissertation that doesn't just pass, but absolutely stands out as world-class. Our goal today is super clear. This explainer provides the exact practical toolkit needed to transform basic legal research into a rigorously argued, world-class law dissertation. We are not going to waste time on vague writing tips here. We're going to master the actual structural architecture of elite legal scholarship. Here's our roadmap for this session. 1. Descriptive versus evaluative. 2. Choosing a topic. 3. Questions and literature reviews. 4. Structuring the chapters. 5. Writing discipline and pitfalls. And 6. A comprehensive, structured recap. Let's dive right in. Section 1. Descriptive versus evaluative writing. Most weak dissertations actually aren't badly written at all. Their fatal flaw? They're merely descriptive. In plain English, this means the writer just reports the information. They accurately explain what the law says, and then they just stop. But that's not enough. A truly world-class dissertation requires what we call an evaluative argument. That is a precise legal term, meaning you have to take a defensible position and argue for it throughout the entire paper. For instance, if you write, "Here is what UN Close Article X requires," well, you've just written a very long descriptive essay. But if you write, "Here is what UN Close Article X requires, here is why India's implementation of it is inadequate, and here is specifically what should change," boom, now you have an evaluative argument. So remember, a true dissertation must always feature a defensible argument, not just a summary of the facts. Moving on to Section 2, choosing a dissertation topic. Let's patiently step through the 4 strict properties that every single viable topic has to have. First up, it addresses a genuine live gap. You really don't want a settled question that already has 100 different answers out there. Second, it's narrow enough to actually finish. A hyper-focused question is always going to beat a broad, sweeping survey. Third, it has a real so what, meaning it actually has practical or policy significance. It can't just be an academic curiosity. And fourth, it has sources you can actually get your hands on. Trust me, you need to verify this before you commit to the topic, definitely not after you've already started writing. If you are sitting there struggling to find a topic, let's talk about a highly reliable technique. In plain language, this is basically about measuring local rules against global rules. The precise term for this is the compliance gap format. It involves assessing whether a country's domestic law actually meets the standards set by an international convention. So you might ask something like, does India's domestic law meet the specific international convention standard? This format is incredibly effective because it gives you a proven, ready-to-go structure. Once you've mapped that gap between the local law and the global standard, honestly, the dissertation practically writes itself. So what do these topics look like in the real world? Let's look at 4 genuine live gaps. First, the BBNJ agreement. This treaty enters into force in January 2026. Assessing India's ratification strategy right now, since they signed it, that is as fresh as a topic gets. Or take the Hague-Visby ratification. Investigating why India still runs on the incredibly outdated 1924 Hague rules, that's a perfect reform gap. Sea level rise offers a fantastic gap where you analyze India's position against the Pacific Islands Forum Declaration on Maritime Baselines. And finally, you could look at the Recycling of Ships Act of 2019, doing a critical appraisal of its compliance with the Hong Kong Convention. All right, Section 3, Questions and Literature Reviews. A topic is really just a broad subject area, but a research question, that is the specific, answerable, arguable inquiry your dissertation actually answers by the very last page. Let's contrast them so it's super clear. Saying I'm going to discuss marine genetic resources is a broad topic. A precise research question would be, should India ratify the BBNJ agreement before finalizing its Biological Diversity Act amendments, or after? Do you see the difference there? We are reinforcing the absolute golden rule here. Your dissertation has to answer a specific inquiry, not just chat about a subject. Now, once you've nailed down that question, you have to write a literature review. But listen closely. The job of a literature review is not to summarize every single thing ever written on your topic. That's a book report. Its actual job is to explicitly show the gap in the existing research. To pull this off, you need to organize it thematically, based on ideas, rather than just dragging the readers source by source. Doing it this way sets up the exact rhetorical pivot you need to introduce your own original work.
And that rhetorical pivot leads us straight to a very specific, highly functional phrase you should use at the very end of your literature review. You want to say, what existing scholarship has not addressed is X, which this dissertation takes up. By explicitly stating exactly what is missing out there, you are perfectly positioning your own evaluative argument to swoop in and fill that exact void.
Section 4, Structuring the Dissertation Chapters. Let's walk through this physical blueprint step by step. First is your introduction, where you lay out the background, the core problem, your methodology, and give the reader a roadmap. Second, you're going to have 2 to 3 substantive chapters, which you'll organize by theme, jurisdiction, or maybe chronology. Third, and I really want to highlight this one, is the critical analysis chapter. This is the magic moment where your description stops and your evaluation begins. This chapter is what separates a good paper from an elite one, because here you use benchmarks to measure whether the law is actually adequate, and you explain the real-world consequences of that gap you've identified. Fourth, your conclusion and recommendations. And finally, number 5, the bibliography.
Speaking of the bibliography, we have to talk about citation rigor. This builds right on top of our earlier principles. You absolutely must keep your primary sources, meaning the actual statutes, the treaties, the cases, strictly separate from secondary sources like books and journal articles. And you have to consistently use proper ILE or Blue Book style. The crucial takeaway here is that secondary sources are just for context. You yourself must always verify the actual primary statute or judgment. Never, ever rely purely on a textbook summary of the law.
Section 5, Writing Discipline and Pitfalls. To actually execute all this well, you have to follow a totally counterintuitive rule. You need to draft your substantive chapters first and write your introduction last. Think about it. Your introduction needs to accurately preview a finished argument, and you simply don't have that argument until you've written it out. Also, get your supervisor's feedback early. Don't wait until you have a perfectly polished draft. And when it comes time to revise, you must insist on doing it in 4 distinct passes, rather than trying to fix everything all at once. Pass 1, does the argument hold? Pass 2, does the structure flow? Pass 3, is the prose clear? Pass 4, is every single citation correct? Segmenting your focus like this is the best way to prevent yourself from getting completely overwhelmed.
Now, as you're in the trenches writing those drafts, how do you actually build a legal argument step by step? You use a precise framework called IRAC. That stands for Issue, Rule, Application, Conclusion. This is the structural logic you've got to apply even all the way down at the paragraph level inside a chapter. First, you clearly state the specific legal issue. Then, you state the rule or the law that governs it. Next is the application, where you actually apply that rule to the specific facts of your topic. And finally, the conclusion. The golden rule here is that this IRAC logic runs all the way down through your writing to keep the whole thing completely airtight. But, even with incredible discipline, things can still go wrong. So let's methodically list out the 5 fatal mistakes that sink most dissertations, just so you can actively avoid them. Number 1, pure description with absolutely no evaluative argument anywhere to be found. Number 2, a topic that is way too broad, where the writer tries to boil the ocean instead of answering one focused question. 3, a weak or entirely non-existent research question. 4, an over-reliance on secondary sources without ever verifying against the primary statutes. And number 5, vague recommendations. Let's drill down into exactly what a vague recommendation is compared to a strong one. Saying the law should be improved is weak. It tells the reader absolutely nothing actionable. Now, compare that to a strong recommendation. Parliament should amend Section 4 of the Admiralty Act to include X. This exact comparison proves exactly why your conclusions must be specific and actionable. It cements the absolute rule of precision in your legal writing.
Okay, Section 6, a comprehensive, structured recap.
Let's patiently read through this to lock all this knowledge into your memory in the exact teaching order we use today. First, we learned that an evaluative argument means defending a position, not just describing one, just like our UNCLOS Article X example. Second, we explored the compliance gap, which is measuring local laws against global ones, like comparing India's Ship Recycling Act to the Hong Kong Convention. Third, we defined the research question as a narrow, arguable inquiry, like that BBNJ ratification timing we talked about. Fourth, we built the chapter architecture, moving through 5 distinct steps that have to culminate in highly actionable recommendations. And finally, we locked in our writing discipline. using IRAC for paragraph-level logic, and strict ILI or Blue Book citation rigor to verify those primary sources.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with one provocative thought. Ask yourself right now, what is the single focus gap your dissertation will conquer? The toolkit is now entirely in your hands. It's time to take this elite framework, apply it to your own legal research, and write something truly world-class. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.